So I have Dr. Cirleen DeBlaere here with me today. We have a series of conversations about counselor education and counseling psychology in our department. And one of our primary audiences is master students who are thinking about pursuing a doctoral program. But I also realize we'll probably touch on some other aspects of just thinking about what it means to have a counseling psychology identity. So my first conversation was with Sarah Gazaway, and she was one of the things she talked about is that it was a little bit confusing to understand the difference between the two, because many of the people that are doc students in our department have very similar goals. Like maybe they want to go into academia. They have very similar research interest, and yet they're in different programs that say, there's big differences between them. So she found that confusing, and it really did take her until her last week to kind of make a decision. And for her, it came down to pragmatics. She knew she was going to want to stay local, and she wanted the PhD level license. And in talking with Chris Noble, that kind of tipped things at the very end. But really, she found both doctoral programs very attractive. And then I talked with Dr. Dispenza, and one of the things that was really helpful and interesting, and also, it gave me a sense of gratitude to be part of the department, was him talking about the models that he had, Annalise Singh, Barry, Jane Brack. So he just talked about some of the, Ken Matheny. So some of the people who modeled for him what it means to be heavily invested in both counseling psychology and counselor education. And with Franco, he kind of grew up at Georgia State, was a doc student, got his first job at Georgia State, and then got tenure at Georgia State. So he really gave us a contextual perspective from within the system. I thought what would be really helpful in talking with Dr. DeBlaere is, she has been at a variety of institutions, and I wanted to kind of hear your story. So she did her undergraduate at Boston University, and then she did a master's. What was your master's in?
General psychology.
General psychology at NYU, New York University. And then she did her doctorate at University of Florida under Bonnie Marotti. And then she took her first position at Lehigh. And did that position did y'all have counselor education and practice within the same department?
We didn't.
So one of the things I thought would be interesting to talk about is just kind of how your identity as a counseling psychologist has developed across your career, and also what it's been like to kind of be at Georgia State, where there's a different kind of salience to that comparison. So those are a few of the things that I thought we might touch on. And I also wanted to just highlight just a few of Dr. DeBlaire's accomplishments. So Cirleen is highly accomplished. She has over 70 publications. She's been a co-PI on a grant, and she has done quite a bit of service. She's currently finishing up a term as the VP of Diversity for Division 17. She started a division. Do you want to talk a little bit about the division you started?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I co-founded a division within the Asian American Psychological Association. It's currently called the Division on Asian Americans with Multiple Heritages, but we're kind of revamping that name because we're a division that is a home for folks with multiracial Asian identities, multi-ethnic Asian identities, but also transnational and transracial adoptees within the Asian community. So we actually have a fairly large membership and leadership in our division of particularly South Korean adoptees. And so, yeah, that's been pretty neat. It's actually a really growing division, a large student membership, and a lot of ECPs.
Yep. And she's been a rising star. One of her awards literally was that she's a rising star, and then she won Woman of the Year. Was that Division 35?
No, Woman of the Year was the section on the advancement of women within Division 17, the
17,
Society of
okay.
Counseling Psych.
Yep.
Yeah.
And she was recently inducted as an APA fellow, and that nomination came from Division 17. But she's been heavily involved in divisional service. Some of her initial service was with Division 44, And then she's also very quickly kind of moved up the ranks within Division 17. So, very thankful to have a chance to talk with her and kind of get just more the personal story side of what it has kind of meant to be a counseling psychologist. And, the other thing I wanted to kind of be able to touch on too is she's, once she got tenure, she became the training director of the counseling psychology program. And so that's another layer of thinking about what it means to be a counseling psychologist. She facilitates the counseling psychology seminar. And so a lot of the acculturation within our department, kind of her role, she's started to think more about what she wants that to look like moving forward. So those are a few of our topics. I wanted to start and just get your story. Our initial audiences are some of the people in the doctoral preparation track just thinking about their careers. And I think sometimes it's when you're kind of making decisions that feel like a big deal, it's kind of hard to know how they play out, and there's uncertainty and all those kind of things. And I think it's sometimes helpful just to hear people's stories and just the weaves and turns of people's careers. So, can you talk a little bit about how it was that you kind of came to be a counseling psychologist? What was that process like, I guess, both in undergrad and in your master's, of starting to be attracted to counseling psychology?
So as an undergrad, I went to BU and entered as a pre-med bio major. I always thought that I wanted to go into medicine. In particular, I wanted to be a pediatrician. I thought working with kids would be pretty cool. And I actually did that. That was my major for I don't think I switched to psychology until my third year, my junior year. So about as late as I could change my major and still graduate on time is about when I did it. Maybe a little context for that is, and an identity that I think is fairly salient for me, is I'm a first generation college student. So my mother emigrated from Taiwan in her later 20s as a woman in her family in a pretty, I think, patriarchal system. She had to end her education in 6th grade so that she could work and help put her younger brothers, actually, so they all the way went through college. So one of her goals, I think, in coming to the United States was actually, she already had kind of envisioned having daughters, actually, in particular, and having the opportunity for her daughters to have a different experience of opportunity. So I think that was very ingrained in me, and so I share that to say that medicine was one of the careers that was a reasonable one. And I seem not to necessarily gravitate towards something like engineering, so medicine or law probably would have been okay. Because those are careers you can call back to Taiwan and share, and people know what doctor and lawyer are. So when what ended up happening was, I actually love science and I loved my classes and a lot, except and actually it wasn't even organic chemistry that did me in. It was molecular biology, which I was sitting in that class, and it was probably the lowest grade I've ever gotten. And I realized that although I love science and I love biology, I actually didn't care about it at the molecular level. Now, maybe had I been a little bit more mature, I would have seen it as a stepping stone to you just have to get through. But I was really hating molecular biology. And I had happened to take, as an elective, an intro to psychology course with a really amazing instructor. And so I'd taken a couple of courses with him, and it was just really fascinating to me. So I had always been, I moved to the U.S. I was born abroad, and then we moved to the U.S. when I was 8, and I think different experiences that I had related to that made me very curious about people and what made people kind of do the things they did, act the ways that they did, engage in the ways that they did. And I, really wasn't aware of psychology, to be quite honest, as a major. I had been pretty science biology directed, so it was all really fascinating to me. And so I decided to switch, and I remember telling my mom I decided to switch, and she was not supportive of that idea. But what actually allowed for her to be supportive was she asked me if I could still be a doctor as if I was a psychology major. And I said, oh yeah, Mom, I can still be doctor. And she said, they can still call you doctor? And I was like, they can still call me doctor. And she goes, oh, well then, yes, of course. I want you to be happy. You know, I always want you to be happy. And I was like, oh, okay. But that was our compromise. And those are the things that sometimes you have to navigate in, I think, a household with, different kind of acculturation. There can be acculturative stress, I think, related to that. But so she was supportive of that. I also shared the part about being a first generation college student because when the time came in my senior year, and I actually ended up having that one professor as my advisor in the psych department to decide what to do next, I decided in the spring of my senior year, I went to his office and I said, okay, I'm ready. I'd like to go into a doc program. And he looked at me and he goes, and he pulled up my transcript, and then he goes, okay. He's like, have you taken the GRE? And I was like, well, no. And he said, well, what research teams have you been a part of? And I said, none. And he goes, okay, you need to get a master's degree. And up until that time, I truly and honestly didn't know that that's what I needed to do. Yeah. I think not having parents that were acculturated in the college system, I really was still very much in a high school mentality of you get good grades and that's all you need to focus on. And so I thought because I had good grades that was enough and that's all you needed. And that was like, a fairly, not a inconsequential, but small part of what I actually needed to do. Because a lot of people had good grades. That wasn't what was going to set me apart as an applicant into a doc program. So I very humbly walked out of his office and considered my plan, which at that point I realized I had missed all the deadlines for every graduate program. And I decided to go home, and I told my mom I was going to take a break from school, and I probably needed that. I'd been going to school. I mean, living abroad, I'd been going to school since I was 2, so I was pretty burned out on school anyway. And I was a bartender for 2 years, which I actually think was a good thing for me to do because I was kind of doing therapy. And I also...
It's kind of either that or cut hair,
Yeah, it was good in that way. And I think the other thing it showed me and reminded me of is how much I really enjoy learning.
Did you learn how to make like different drinks?
Yeah, I was actually very good. You can make a lot of money as a bartender. Don't ask me to make stuff now. I would honestly forget. But that's what I did. And you can, and I made a fairly good income. And so for somebody who was 22, living at home, I was flush with cash. I was feeling pretty good.
You could have stuck with that, but...
Yeah.
But there's Mom. That wasn't...
Yeah. Mom was probably like, when are you going to go back to school? And I think there was probably a part of it too. So my mom, growing up, the way that my mom supported us is that she was a waitress. And I think there was a part where she was probably like, okay, it's time.
So were you back? You were back in Florida.
Mm-hmm. So I graduated and went back to Florida. And then... And probably, after a year or two, I took my GREs that first year, and luckily I did well. So I at least had the forethought to do GREs while school was kind of fresh. And so, I did it. I was very stressed out by it, but, I did well on the exam and started to look at programs. I think when I didn't look that first year, I really did want to take a break. And then into my second year, I realized that I actually missed I missed learning. I missed talking to people about ideas. I kind of missed kind of the intellectual exercise of school. Yeah. And so, so I looked at programs. I applied to 2 programs. Master's programs, and they were totally based on where I wanted to live, and I wanted to live in New York City, so I applied. So
you didn't try any doc programs. Like, do you think you could have gotten into a doc program, and do you think that advisor was right? Because it sounds like your GRE scores were good, and you had, a solid undergrad GPA, I assume.
I did. I had a solid undergrad GPA. I had a very good psych GPA. And a solid GPA, and I had good GRE scores. This is another thing where... Here's another thing where if I had different mentoring and had known to seek out mentoring, there probably was a doc program out in the world that I probably could have gotten into just with my GPA and GRE scores.
Or, I mean, I guess you weren't that close, but I mean, if you had known you wanted to work with Bonnie, you probably could have connected with her lab.
Oh, yeah, which I know other people who did. Yeah, I literally had no clue what I was doing.
Yeah. So in a certain way, getting a master's was a good next step.
That was a good next step for me because
it gave you some student loans, but other than that,
it gave me student loans I'll be paying into my days of Social Security. Yes, but the part about that actually
unless we elect Bernie, forgives it.
Yeah, I mean I would be greatly appreciative of that. But I think. I think a master's program, as much as it was a lot of money, and at NYU, basically being a master's student was paying for doctoral students to be attending in their clinical doctoral program.
It's a model. Isn't that the teaching college model?
Yeah. It's a model. Master's students fund doc students because there isn't a, so.
So what was it per year?
Oh, gosh. I think it was like 8. It was whatever the max amount you can get in Stafford loans is what NYU, like in a lot of master's programs that function in that way, their tuition actually almost exactly equals what you can max out in graduate loans.
So that's how they justify it.
So it's about 18, it was about 18,500 a year.
And then housing?
And then
on
housing,
top of it, in New York.
In New York, which I did take out some loans, but I also, in my master's program, I worked like simultaneous jobs. So I was like a grader, which paid a little bit. I was a nanny, which paid a little bit. I worked at Pizzeria Uno's, which paid a little bit. So
you were that grad student
that
everyone hears about that does it all. You were the super grad student.
I was, and luckily NYU, the classes were mostly in the evening. So I was able to have day jobs. So I definitely, I was able to, other than the tuition cost, like I didn't take out additional loans, mostly because I was able to, I worked a bunch of jobs and was able to kind of support myself in that way. So, so, I was fortunate, I think, in a lot of ways and kind of being able to figure that out.
Yeah.
But it was a lot of money, and it was a more circuitous route, but I think for me it was good because I did get I think, NYU I think is a fairly, I don't know if it's elite, but it's a highly competitive, it's a strong institution academically.
Yeah.
And I got socialization very, very quickly in like what graduate process is. And most of the people in the program that I was in were planning on doctoral study because we weren't necessarily in an applied program. We were actually in a program with, you were taking core courses that were very doctoral applicable. And there was a strong emphasis on like, you should get research experience because you're not doing clinical training that would get you licensed, right? And so it was actually a really good fit in that way. Interestingly enough, I was actually in the orientation at Fordham. So the other program I applied to was Fordham's social work program because I liked the values of social work. And I had gotten accepted and I was actually attending the orientation when my sister called me and told me that I'd gotten a letter from NYU and I was accepted to their master's program as a scholar. So, which I was like, oh, that sounds good. And I was like, which school? And I was like, oh.
What does the scholar part mean?
It just meant that like I was just a master's scholar. It was like a different designation, which at first I was like, oh, that's cool.
It's nice, I'm a scholar.
Yeah, I'm a scholar. It was just like an award that it had no monetary value at all. It was probably just something they did to like get me to come. I think it was something they gave for like folks who, if you came in with a certain GRE score and GPA, like you got.
So it was an honor.
It was
President's List or something.
Yeah, it's something like that.
Yeah.
But it had like no, like I probably could have done with a monetary award of some kind, which that did not.
Well, maybe we should start giving that out to students.
It's true. Just give a designation of scholar. It still does look good on a Vita, I guess. It helps. But anyway, I actually on the spot declined. I said, oh, I'm sorry. I'm actually not going to register. And then I went across town. I went to NYU and registered there. But awesome. It was good. It was a great, I'm glad, I wanted to live in New York while I was young. I'd done Boston. It was just fun. It was but the training was actually really, really good. And it was a turning point for me in a lot of ways. Not only did I get socialized into what was going to make me a competitive doctoral student, And I did. I got very explicit feedback. Like, these are the things that you need to do. You know, I sat down, the director of the master's program was very open to sitting down to students. He looked over my transcript.
Yep.
He looked over my GRE scores, and he was very matter of fact. You know, he's like, this is good. He's like, your GRE scores are good. Now he's like, if you could get them even a little bit higher, he's like, you'd be next level. Like, he's like, you could probably get it anyway. But he's like, and I was like, I don't really want to ever take them again. So if you tell me that these are good enough to get me into a doc program, I think I'm good. And
I'm thinking of our doctoral preparation track students. Like, you're, you know, a little bit scary to them in a certain way, because, you know, there's basically people that do get really good acculturation. I mean, it's what we're trying to address in that program. Like, there are people who have access to all the information, and they have every benefit in terms of getting ready.
Yes.
And, you know, most doc programs have something like 4 to 8 spots.
Yep.
So.
Yes.
So you were ready. I mean, you weren't ready.
I was not ready.
Coming out of undergrad. By the time you got done at NYU.
I was ready.
You were ready.
Yeah.
I'm guessing it ended up paying off.
Yes, it did end up paying off. I mean, I think, and that's why, like, and I would say this to students that are, you know, if they're listening to this and they're at Georgia State and they want to have a conversation, I very much appreciated getting very direct feedback. I mean, however I might feel about some of the ways in which we evaluate the process, I could not have been competitive in the process if somebody just wasn't really direct with me about what it is that would get me into the program I want to get into, right? And so the fact that he sat down, looked at my transcript, asked me, you know, really pointed questions, and then he's like, these are the things you need to do. And the obvious ones were I needed to get research experience. So that's what I did. Like, I got on a dissertation with a doctoral student in the clinical program, and then I was able to, you know, I kind of looked for experiences, and then I was able to find a research assistantship that actually paid a little money, which was nice, at NYU Child Study Center. So I kind of got the experience of, like, kind of working on a large grant study, working in a hospital setting, and it was, you know, I was supervised by a postdoc and a faculty member. You know, so I think those were really good experiences, and probably ones that on my vita. And they were also, the postdoc was able to help me to navigate the process too, in terms of how to talk about the skills that I had acquired and translate those in an application. Yeah,
I mean, I don't know if this gets too far ahead, but at what point did your current research focus, your current research program, at what point did you start to kind of pick up the scent on that? Like, did that happen at NYU, or was that later?
No, it did. It was totally at NYU, and that's why I'm so like, that was absolutely the right place for me to be. But
it wasn't on those research projects.
Because those research projects, I think one was on, like, depression, and the one at the Child Study Center. I think so. The clinical project, the dissertation was something related to, like, depression and I don't remember what else. So clearly it was very meaningful to me. And then the Child Study Center, I mean, that was an actual cool study to work with kids, but it was hard. It was actually a study about working with parents who had been charged and convicted of child abuse. And so it was about parental interventions for abuse. Wow. And so you worked with the family system and around ways of working with parents in particular to be able to stay with their kids and learn adapt other coping strategies to be able to, you know, as part of as part of their kind of process of keeping their children. So it was intense, but it also, I think, what I appreciate about that was I think it showed me what's possible in terms of the work of psychologists. And in that way, I think it was really meaningful. So the director of the program actually told me, he's like, Cirleen, I think after the first year, you'll show that you can get strong grades in a master's program. I think you should just apply out after your first year. And it would have saved me close to $20,000. But I felt like, I was like, no, I want to finish, which I don't know that I needed to do that, actually. And now as a professor, I absolutely know that you don't necessarily need to do that.
There were some values that you had personally that, you know, it's like, I'm not going to start something and not finish it. That felt incomplete to me. But again, it was $20,000.
I
mean, I can also see it too. I mean, you picked NYU for a reason. It's nice to get your degree.
It's true. It did feel incomplete. And in fact,
I can see that.
It ended up working out because my decision to stay in my second year, I think it was my second year, the fall of my second year is when things really clarified for me.
Yeah.
So to your question about when did I like catch the scent or what have you?
Yeah.
I took a multicultural course. I took a multicultural psych course with Dr. Adelbert Jenkins. I will always remember his name. He was amazing. He was a clinical psychologist. He'd worked at Bellevue. He was like for a long time, I think was the director of training at Bellevue.
Oh, wow.
So just really amazing, psychologist in person. And it was an elective. So I had to take an elective class that wasn't part of the core training. And I picked multicultural because, I had an interest in culture. But that class was transformative for me. The stuff he had us read related to identity, immigration, in particular, we talked a lot about racial identity. And for me, as a kind of multiracial person who probably has always had a complex relationship with identity, it was an awakening for me. I was reading stuff that gave language to experience. It gave language to racism. So I kind of alluded to earlier, moving to the United States when I was 8 in a predominantly white area where people had never really interacted with Asian folks.
Yeah.
I experienced a lot of racism and a lot of racial bullying. And so that class for me was like, oh, like I can study this. Like I can actually study what this is and what this is about. But it really felt a little bit to me too that like that was so transformative to me to have the awareness that like this was something that people cared about even. Yeah. And it also legitimized my experience in a way that like nothing else had before. Cause like trying to talk to people, and again, I'd grown up in especially when I was younger, just not in contexts where there were a lot of Asian folks or there were just, and I think as I got older, I found communities with other racial groups and racial ethnic groups. But within my different contexts, I think the conversations around racial identity, the conversations around discrimination were maybe present, but somewhat limited for me. And so, and I just really wasn't able to even articulate all the things that I was feeling or heard or felt or experienced. And so that class gave me so much context.
Yeah.
And so I actually, to be honest, up until that point, I'd been kind of disillusioned with psychology. And I probably decided in my first year, I was like, why would I go to get a PhD for like 5 more years of this? Just to do more of this, I was like, I'm just going to get my master's degree. I think I can there are certain states that I could practice or I'll be a social worker. Like I can work, I can work in like DFACs. There's places that I could work with a master's degree in psychology and make a difference. Because I was like, there's nothing about this that feels like it's resonating in a way that is worthy of more education. Yeah. Which that was a fun conversation with my mother also.
And what was the source of the disillusionment?
Like I'd already heard it before. Yeah. Like, and I was getting A's. So like
you were bored with it?
Kind of. Yeah. Yeah. Like I was like, I'm really good at memorizing neuropsych. I'm really good at memorizing, I could understand all the cognitive psych concepts. I thought social psychology was interesting, but, I wasn't really sure, like, how is this going to make a difference? Yeah. How is this impactful, I think? Yeah, yeah. And, like, how is this any different than me? Like, I kind of felt like I could make more of a difference being, like, caseworker or, something like that. Until I took this class. And then I was like, oh, well, that felt really important to me. The fact that like I could not only like talk about or study like identity and racism and discrimination in particular, but that it felt like those were at least for me, the fact that wasn't a story that had been told to me the entire time I was a psych major and my first year as a master's student felt hugely problematic.
Yeah.
And then I was kind of thinking like, you could go through an entire psych undergrad degree and never learn about kind of culture, identity, and also the impact of minority stressors, and also how much it was so like how much people of color, but also other marginalized groups' experiences were not centered and weren't even like, even sometimes weren't even an addendum to, you know, there wasn't everybody, there was just the assumption that everything we talk about applies to everyone. And it just wasn't true. And this was the first class that I like was like, oh, but this applies to me.
Yeah.
And it's important to think about this stuff when we're thinking about this other stuff. And I was like, now if I can contribute to that, that feels meaningful to me. Like why are there, you know, like not more people talking about this or doing this work and at that point I was like, oh, I'm definitely getting a PhD. Like I'll get a PhD if I can do this, you know? And I didn't know what I wanted to do with the PhD per se, but I knew that like this was meaningful. This felt important. And I also ended up taking a gender studies class, a women's studies class. And that was also really enlightening in terms of thinking about like how gender impacts like women's development and gender socialization and gender role conflict. So all of those pieces. And so, yeah, so at that point I was like, I was psyched about it.
And it sounds like you started to have a better sense of what you were looking for too.
It clarified everything for me. Like I was like,
one thing I was going to check too before we go too far on is did that professor know how much his class influenced you? Like, was it a big class? Like, did you have a relationship with him, or was it?
Yeah. How big was the class? Like, the good thing I will say about NYU's master's program is I think sometimes some programs, and I think Georgia State is good this way too.
Yeah.
Will keep the class sizes small. So I think my class, and I mean, I think it's a little bit sad. Like, our class was smaller. Not everybody wanted to take the multicultural psych class. You know, there were other classes that were also very interesting. Yeah. That people took. So my class was maybe 10 people.
Okay. So
it was awesome.
So he got to know you pretty well.
He did.
He probably knew that it made a big difference.
Yeah, I think he did. Like, I mean, that class was emotional. Like, I cried in that class. Like, I was a mess a little bit at different times. And
it sounds like he must have held the space pretty well.
He held amazing space. Yeah. He held amazing space. He actually, I was the TA for his class the next year. Okay. So I think he knew that he was that was impactful. And actually I had the you know, he wrote my letters when I applied. Yeah. It was kind of interesting, the letter that he wrote, because you know, usually they'll say like, you know, some places will ask you to talk about, you know, the strengths, but some places will ask you like to say like, you know, are there any, you know, areas for growth or challenges or concerns? And like, I feel like generally people are like, no, this person's fabulous. He actually wrote one, but it was really interesting. And what he said was like, that basically I was going to have a lot of countertransference around racism. And that, you know, issues of identity were things that I was working through, and that as a clinician and kind of doing the work, as a clinician and probably as a researcher too, that the amount of countertransference that I would have related to like discrimination was going to be something that be something that I might struggle with. And he wasn't wrong. Yeah. It was just interesting that he put in you know what? I appreciate it.
I mean, honestly, I don't know him, but it almost sounds like he took his role as a supervisor almost more important than his role of recommending. I mean, because that's kind of what, like, if you were passing someone in supervision, that would be the kind of, I mean, when someone gives you accurate feedback, it's a gift.
Oh, absolutely.
But, you know, it's more typical for doc applications to be like, oh yeah, their only problem is taking on too much. Yeah,
they take on too much. They don't, you know, they don't know how to say no. Like, you know, they are too motivated for their own. Yeah. No, he wrote, but you know, in retrospect, one of the things I also think about is that I think he was taking care of me too. Yeah. I think he was letting people know that like, these were issues that were deeply felt by me, and that he would want for somebody who was committed.
Yeah, and
to help me work
in
through
a certain
those
way, it probably helped give a certain signal to mentors that would be a good fit. Because
I think so.
I mean, I don't know Bonnie that well, but I can't imagine she would read that and that wouldn't be a very positive sign.
Yeah,
for her, so.
I think so. I do think that I appreciate. It's made me more thoughtful about when I think about writing letters. Interesting, but it was interesting when I was like, what? I was like, Dr. Jenkins, nobody actually writes anything. Everybody else was like, she's got no, and like he was like, she has some issues. But like in terms of like full circle moments, like a couple years ago, I was at APA, the American Psych Association conference, and I was doing a talk on intersectionality. And after I was coming, and it was kind of a little bit of a funky day. Like this particular city where this conference was, all the buildings were super far apart, so I was like 10 minutes late to the presentation, which was also embarrassing. And anyway, so I do my bit, and it was fine. I think there were a couple moments because I was a little flustered that weren't like, I wasn't like the most pleased with, but it was fine. And then I was coming off the stage, and Dr. Jenkins was there, and he was like, Cirleen. He's like, and I was like, and I recognized him immediately, and I was like, Dr. Jenkins. And he was like, I was looking through the programming and I saw your name, and I was like, I know her. And I burst into tears. I like burst into tears. Yeah. And I shared with him how impactful he'd been. And I'm like emotional thinking about it now, because he gave me such a gift.
Yeah.
In terms of connecting me with a purpose that felt meaningful. So I will always be truly like touched and indebted to him. Yeah. And I was so grateful for the opportunity, because he's retired now. He's older. The opportunity, like, I mean, I don't know that I wish that I would have like broken down into tears in front of everybody. But I was kind of okay with the fact that he saw that. And I think I was also very grateful for the opportunity, because I told him that as I was leaving, like you know, how important he'd been to me. But to be in a place where like, I'm presenting and he liked what I said, and he's like, you're a professor now, and like all this other stuff. And for me to share with him in the context of all that, the impact that he had on me, and to be able to express gratitude for that was just like a huge gift for me. So
definitely. I could just tell even at the beginning of the story how much gratitude that you feel.
I feel. Yeah, I'm forever grateful. So
I'm glad you were able to express that personally to him.
Oh yeah, that was huge. That was, I mean, again, I have moments of like, oh, I wish I could have been more eloquent in that moment. But I still am so grateful for the opportunity, and it meant a lot that like, I'm sure he's taught a lot of students, master's cohorts aren't small. And it meant a lot that he took the time out of it. I think he was there getting a Lifetime Achievement Award actually at APA. Yeah. In his clinical work. And so the fact that he would take the time to come and see my presentation and then come and talk to me meant a lot. And then I actually saw him later again, and it was just so it's always meant a lot to me that I can share with him. Yeah. His impact on me. But yeah, that was. After that, I was like, I know exactly what I want. I wrote essays that talked about, I want to study racial identity. I want to study racism. I want to study, the impact. I want to study, racial ethnic minority people and impact on health and mental health. And I think I had a much more my ability to articulate my interests was like a 180 from when I started my master's program. Yeah. Because Dr. Jenkins also taught a really good class that you had to do a lot of reading in. And so my familiarity and my ability to contextualize my interest within the literature, I think, was a strength of my ability, not only in my personal statement, but in interviewing. Yep. And so, I was able to make an informed decision. So like, this is maybe the longest answer to how I came to counseling psychology, but
we're getting the story. I mean, I think people get the oh, here's the difference here, here's the difference there. But I mean, I think for people to figure out their own journey, I think they actually need to hear some stories. So I think it's good. Yeah. But it sounds like, so in a certain way, you could have applied earlier, but you would have missed all the clarification happened your second year. Then by the time that you're applying, you kind of know the themes or the areas of interest. But at that point, I don't know if you knew the distinctions, but it sounds like that wasn't necessarily what was driving your decisions. You were actually looking for people. You went from thinking there weren't a lot of people that would kind of be a good fit with you giving your life to this area, and you were actually looking for ways out.
Yeah.
To now you're looking for people who could kind of help you do what you were starting to realize you wanted to do.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the same in terms of thinking about so the time comes to apply, I'm in my fall semester. Luckily, I had taken my GRE a couple years ago, so I had that going for me. And then it was time to apply. And so again, sitting down and having that conversation with the director, he was like, the critical piece of doctoral training is your advisor. That's the most critical piece.
Yeah.
Which again, like, I don't know, I wouldn't have known that unless somebody told me that, right?
Yeah.
And so he was like,
that's not how undergrad works.
No, it's like the total opposite. You don't pick you don't go by institution prestige. Like it's none of those things. He was like, find the advisor.
Yeah.
And then that's the program. So look for it. So that's what I did. So I pulled papers that were on topics that were interesting to me. I was very focused on on identity, racial identity, discrimination. And so I started pulling papers, and I pulled recent papers because you want to, because people kind of change
they're
still publishing, but also, people change research directions and research programs. So I wanted somebody who's currently working on those things.
Yep.
And, at BU, there was a clinical program, at least in the psych and then NYU is very clinical. So, and so I just assumed I would end up in a clinical psych program. So but when I was looking at people who were doing the work I was interested in, I stumbled upon counseling psychology. So the people who were doing this, so I ended up applying to, I think, like 15 schools or something like that, right? 14 or 15 schools. They were half and half, counseling psych and clinical psych. I got an interview at every single counseling psych program.
Oh, wow.
And I got an interview at like half of the clinical psych programs. So I think I had like maybe 10 or 12 interviews, something like that.
Yeah.
So that was encouraging, I will say.
Yeah.
So that was good. But I think already you could tell, I think in even my sharing this with you, that the fit was clearer already.
Yep.
The fact that all counseling programs were like, she seems like a fit with us. And maybe some of the clinical programs felt like I was a fit.
Yeah.
Then I went on the interviews. And I remember in the counseling programs, it was just like everybody was on board with me. Like everybody was like, yeah, these are great interests. Like, who are you reading? Like the fact that I could talk about who I was reading, people seemed to like. And then I'd also started reading stuff on multiracial identity. So when people were talking about like where, what has been really impactful. And I talked about Maria P.P. Root, who wrote one of the first books on multiracial identity. And she wrote, basically like the tenets and the rights of multiracial people. And I was like, this has been really impactful for me, and like the fact that I had like read literature that I could kind of tell people why I was interested in the things I was interested in, but then people were totally behind it. They were like, yeah, that's great. And have you done this? And I was like, yes. And then in the clinical programs, I was having like debates with the people who were interviewing me about why is culture important? I study schizophrenia. Tell me why there's a cultural context to schizophrenia. Somebody has a mental illness. Culture doesn't matter. And I was like, actually, there's research to suggest that culture actually does matter in terms of manifestations of symptomatology for things like schizophrenia. And that the symptomatology actually manifests differently by racial ethnic groups, so that there could be a cultural context to that and the cultural stresses. And so like these were the conversations I was having, and I just leave like so pissed. Yeah. But then I think I got accepted. So like I think they were like, maybe it was a challenge.
Yeah.
And kind of just
I was actually gonna ask, do you think that was like a professional culture difference of like they're actually just more challenging in debating, or do you think that it was cultural resistance?
You know,
or both?
I think it's a little bit of both. So I think there was a little bit of testing me to see how much I was going to be able to engage the conversation, which I can appreciate that on some
And I mean,
level.
your advisor did put something in there that would, I mean, that people could have also just been testing your
Yes,
countertransference.
it's true. And being able, how much I didn't think about that. I guess that's possible. They were testing how much I could engage without,
And affect regulation.
Yeah. And I think I was able to, I mean, I got accepted. So I think I was able to engage in the ways
Well, and I mean,
that
they were probably
would want.
competitive programs, so they must have.
Yeah, so they were wanting that. But I think for me,
it didn't help on the recruiting side.
No, it didn't help on the recruiting side because I probably was at a stage in my own racial identity development where I was looking for a place where I could feel supported.
Yeah.
I wasn't necessarily looking for a place where I was going to have to fight for the things that I cared about. I was probably looking to be mentored and supported in the things I cared about. Yeah. So it made it very clear to me that counseling psychology was probably where I was going to go. Yeah. And then the mentors and who I connected with the most were counseling psychologists. And then how I was deciding between a couple programs. I was fortunate to be accepted and be able to choose. I was fortunate to be accepted into programs with funding, and I made a very pragmatic decision. Mm-hmm. And I basically, after working like 3 or sometimes 4 jobs as a master's student, I was like, I want the place that will give me the most money. So that's what I did.
I want to be able to focus on my work.
Yeah. So I picked the place that, I got a fellowship that I didn't have to, basically I could do research with my advisor and happened to be the one that paid me the most. Yeah. Not that much more, but a little bit more. So that's the program I went to.
So in a certain way, that part you probably got a little bit lucky because Bonnie's awesome.
Yes.
And if you had made a decision around money and had a different advisor, that would have been a shame.
Oh yeah.
So there's a few kind of
lucky moments.
Call it luck, call it something else.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, the other people that I was thinking of, I think the other people are quite good. Like I know them now.
Okay, so you'd have been okay.
I would have been okay. Yeah. Like if I would have gone with the other folks, that I would have been okay. Like they're all, those are really strong programs.
You were choosing between good options.
Yeah. So I had the good fortune of being able to choose between good options.
Well, and that's what you earned your second year.
Yeah.
Like you earned clarity over what you were looking for. I mean, I talked about this briefly with Franco, but I wasn't as clear. I didn't get nearly that much acculturation.
Yeah.
So I just applied to programs and told people that I wanted to study forgiveness, but there were only like 2 or 3 people that actually studied forgiveness. No. Otherwise, I just told them how their research program could fit in forgiveness, and none of those people were very interested. So I lucked out in a different kind of way. I mean, Ev was one of the top 2 forgiveness researchers, and that worked out. But that was it wasn't on behalf of good acculturation.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think absolutely. I think I was able to go into the process with a lot of clarity. I think I was able to, I'd gotten also enough acculturation that I think I was able to I had a strong personal stand, like all the pieces were there. Yeah. And then it allowed me to I was in a very different boat at the beginning of those, at the end of those 2 years than the beginning of or even that year and a half, I guess, because it's your fall of your second year. I was then in the position of being able to choose.
Oh yeah. Well, and I mean, it's almost the equivalent of like them recruiting a faculty member. Like basically your top options were giving you paid fellowships.
Yes.
So
And so, which was, which
paid
was
for
nice.
itself. I mean, the $20,000 of your second year at
that's
NYU.
True.
I mean,
it kind of did.
All in all,
I'm still paying for it. But yes.
Well, no, but it paid. The differential.
Oh no, it absolutely did. And the other thing I think about too is like I know people who, and I think that's fabulous. People who like went straight from undergrad into a doc program and they just had the clarity all the way through. And I think that's. I think that's great in its own way. I wouldn't what am I trying to say? I'm grateful for the path that I took, because the fact that I took a little bit more of a circuitous route to where I ended up meant that when I got into my program, I was ready.
Oh, yeah.
I was very ready. I was a little bit older, so I'd taken a couple years off. So other people might have been coming in at like 22 or 23, and I think I was like 25 or whatever. So I was a little bit older, and I was ready. Like I was very motivated.
You were out of the mud. I mean, I see the transition from the master's style where your curriculum is laid out for you, and there's a lot of variability in how much doc students thrive, but the ones that really thrive, they're much more self-directed, and they basically know what they want from their training, and they seek it out and so it's if I were going to weight how much courses matter, I would give it 20% or less.
Yep.
It's really about what you do with the rest of that time, and you can't invest it if you're not ready. Yeah. So it sounds you were basically.
Oh, I was definitely ready. Yeah.
And people could tell. I mean, that's basically.
Yes.
You know it now. I don't know if you knew it then, but like when you were interviewing, that's what people knew about you. Like they heard you talking and they're like, oh, she's ready.
Yeah, that's probably true.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably true. I was very, and I will say the other thing, the classes.
Which is a little rare, actually. I mean, you actually don't hear, that's exciting when you see that in an applicant. Like when you can tell, like, oh, this person's ready to do work with me. Like my next paper, they're ready to work.
Yeah, that's true. That's actually true. Yeah, and I think my advisor said something like that to me at some point, and I don't know. I mean, now being an advisor, I can understand her meaning in a different
why
kind
she
of way.
Was excited.
Yeah, I mean, because you're right. Like to find students that have that level of that are ready in that particular way is a fun thing to find. But she I was definitely, and I felt it. It was kind of interesting because, so I actually ended up being in a cohort of 10, which is unusual, but UF, being in a psych department was pretty well funded. Our program was pretty well funded. And so, and we got strong people. So there was a number of us on fellowships, which freed up the departmental funds. And so, but a lot of those folks were, some of them had masters, but they were master's degrees that were applied. And then other folks were coming from undergrad. And I will say one of the things, NYU was expensive, but my classes were really good. So I was able to waive a lot. And then I came into my doctoral studies. So like you said, coursework's not as essential. But I came into my courses like very ready. Yeah. Like I'd gotten very good training. The classes I took at NYU were really good classes. They were reading intensive. My workload was high. So the transition to the actual workload of doctoral work was like very easy for me. I wasn't overwhelmed by the amount of reading, whereas I feel like some of my colleagues sometimes were like, how do you get all this reading done? I was like, you don't get it all done. Like you prioritize, like you look it over. You read, you skim, you get the parts, and then you figure out what's, there's a whole sifting
through. There's a paper due at the end of the semester. It's like you write the paper.
Yeah. So like, I think I was ready for that. And then, I was ready to work in terms of working with Bonnie. And then, and I remember like my very first paper she taught my counseling psych seminar. And I remember I turned in my paper to her and she wrote back and she's like, and she like, and we had a meeting. She's like, you're a good writer. And I was like, oh, well, thanks. And I didn't really realize why she was so excited about that. But I think, it is a little bit to what you're saying. Like I was very ready to learn. Like I was a sponge. Like I wanted to learn anything that she had to teach me. I wanted to take all these classes. I wanted to understand, because for me, it felt like I needed to get these skills so I could make a difference. Yeah. And so I was very, very motivated to learn anything that anybody was going to teach me. And so grad school was phenomenal for me. I enjoyed my doctoral program so thoroughly. And there's, crap that goes with anything, and there's parts of it that probably feel more mundane, and there's stuff that was challenging at different times. But in terms of like my growth and my learning, I feel like I am so grateful, so similar to Dr. Jenkins, so grateful to Bonnie. Like I wouldn't be a professor without her.
Yeah. I can tell that ended up being a really good fit. What was it that was a good fit? Like what did you get from Bonnie?
Well, one is it's really cool to learn from somebody that you genuinely feel is smarter than you.
Yeah.
And so, like, I genuinely
Yeah.
think I have so much respect for Bonnie and her mind. Like I mean, she's a great big heart too, but the ways that she's like precise in her thinking, I really like. It was cool to like hear her talk. It was cool to have her think through problems in front of me.
Yeah.
It was like, she's really smart. And it was really cool to sit with somebody who's really smart and have them kind of be willing to talk about like really smart things with you, you know? And so that was
you knew
cool.
you knew if you worked hard, she could help sharpen your skills.
Yes.
And you could do it just with talking with her in meetings. And you could also do it just by giving her your best work and getting her feedback.
Yes. And she was very, as prolific and as productive as she is. You know, we had our weekly meeting and I always felt like I was a priority for her. And I mean, she was very, the other thing that I wish I'd learned more from her, she was also very boundaried. Like she'd be like, my summers are my time to write, because she genuinely loved writing. She loves that. And but she I could tell she was invested in my training. And she she just was, I mean, in so many different ways, she was a great fit for me. But one of them was like, I think she was good for me too, in the fact that because I had so much respect for her, as much as I struggled with all of my imposter stuff, I trusted her enough that when she would tell me that I did a good job, like I would trust her. Like I don't know that I trust everybody when they tell me I do a good job. But when she told me I did a good job, like I really, like I have so much trust in her that I believed it when she said it. And that was probably real. I probably needed that as a trainee. And I think like, I forget about this, but like, I think going into the program, like, at the time, I was the only Asian student in the program at the time of my admission. And so I did feel a certain like pressure to be like, you know, I don't know. I felt that whole, you know, represent kind of pressure. But I also, you know, I always kind of had like some imposter stuff related to like, you know, when are people going to notice that maybe I am not as smart as maybe some people think I am, and all of that. So I think she really was great in that way, because there were things in which, you know, when she'd be like, oh, this is an area for growth, like I'd be like, cool. And then when she said, you are really doing well here, I could take, so it probably allowed me to take feedback from her in a way that was really like growth promoting. And then the other part is the part of when I said being a professor is because of her. Like I would have never thought that. So like, I would do that. Like when I thought about being a psychologist, and even, you know, so like for those of you applying, they'll ask you, what do you want to do in 5 years? I said, you know, I want to work in a university context. So I kept it about as vague as possible, while trying to say that I, you know, didn't hate research. So I was like, you know, or that I was enjoying research, but like, I honestly didn't know. And I assumed that I would be a practicing clinician as a psychologist. And I wanted a PhD in psychology because I wanted the most flexibility with what I could do with my time. So I could consult, I could be a therapist, I could, you know, maybe I could teach. But in my mind, I was thinking of like the professors I'd had at NYU, many of whom were like, you know, retired or emeritus professors, and or had a private practice primarily and did this, you know. So I was imagining something like that. And I never thought about being a tenure track professor, certainly not in an R1 institution. And I wouldn't have thought about it if Bonnie didn't say, you know, Cirleen, you might be good at this. And I was like, what are you talking about? And if she hadn't told me, I wouldn't have believed it. Like, but she was like, no, you know, you could do this. And I truly and honestly would not have considered it if she hadn't said that to me. And I wouldn't have believed it if anybody else had said it to me, you know? So
you trusted her. I mean, it started
totally
with trusting her just to give you feedback on your strengths and weaknesses, but it grew into her being able to speak into your larger kind of strengths about where you could kind of invest your life. And I mean, that is, you know, that's quite a gift to have someone that, you know, you trust in that way.
Oh yeah, it really is. Like
I have
so
a short
grateful.
list that, because I know the feeling you're talking about. When you're a lot of people who go into any kind of like master's or doctoral programs, I mean, you have an achievement orientation.
Mm-hmm.
So you're kind of used to just positive feedback sometimes, and you don't really know, like what you need to grow is you actually need people who that you really can trust their feedback, that it's not them just telling you nice things.
Yep.
And if they're going to give you criticism, you need to know that their criticism is intended to help you grow.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't trust that, then you really aren't, there's not much use to the feedback. And
Yeah.
It sounds like, you picked up in her kind of an exceptional level of, at least for you personally, like how much you trusted her to kind of give you feedback.
Yeah.
And it sounds like also across a range of skills. So it's not just your writing. It's actually you kind of generally trusted her in various roles as a psychologist.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I really did. I still do. I mean, my contacts with her are fewer, but I still have them, and she's still a person that I seek counsel from, and our relationship has evolved into something, different now, than it was when I was in grad school. I mean, as it should, but I have so much gratitude for, I think I've been very, very fortunate in some of my critical mentoring relationships. And Bonnie is definitely what she was able to. And one of the things too I appreciated about her was she held me to high standards. She has high standards, which was good. But the other part, she would say, like, I don't know that I'd had another person. So the first time I taught my first class, I was teaching like 70 some undergrads in a psychopersonality class. And I was telling her, I was like, okay, so I'm trying to think about like, what to have them call me. And I know some people will do this, but I'm not really a professor. So I was just going to have them call me Cirleen. And she was like, what are you doing? And I was like, well, what do you mean? Like, I'm a grad student, they're like, most of them are like, sophomores, juniors, and undergrad. Like, I'm not that far removed from that. I'm not doctor yet. So, so I probably just Cirleen. And she was like, what? She's like, okay. She's like, you are younger. You're a woman. You're a woman of color. You are going into that space with people who are going to be very ready to not acknowledge your status and your power in the room.
Yeah.
And you'll be with people who would be very willing, and not necessarily in a malicious way, to not to take your power, not necessarily be respectful.
Yeah.
So she's like, you go in there and you like go in basically, I mean, this wasn't her language, but basically what she said, you go in hard.
You can always relax.
That's what she basically said. She was like, you can always get nicer, Cirleen.
Yeah.
You can always get nicer, and everybody appreciates that. You can't get meaner because then you're a B.
Yeah.
And she was right. So I was like, I felt so uncomfortable that first day, but I came across as a hard ass. I was like, this is the syllabus. Don't be late. Don't be trying to turn in late. I mean, I came across like really very hard, And then like as the semester went along, I like softened, and it was so funny because like my evaluations were like, oh, Professor DeBlaere is really strict, but she's like also like really cool. It was just like, and like, because I do have a sense of humor and like so I would like kind of stuff, but like I went in with Bonnie's like wisdom, I was like, all right, go in, be like really tough. And when that's totally not my personality or the way I would do it, but I'm so appreciative for that, because there have been I've always kept that, because I mean, I think as I get older, the age thing is less of an issue, but like going in and, looking like I was about the same age as the students and other things, I think she anticipated certain challenges that I just wouldn't have. And so her ability to mentor me was in like really holistic ways too, which were very, very helpful to me, as I was kind of traversing graduate school and then also kind of going into the job market.